What if you tried to recover from burnout, only to find yourself in a home where every kindness is twisted and every silence speaks louder than words? I'm Autumn, and I thought my brother's house would be a safe place to land. I was wrong. What began as a quiet reset turned into a slow unraveling of every thread holding me together. Stick with me, because this isn't just about family tension. It's about what you do when your very presence becomes an unspoken offense. And what happens at the end of this story will definitely surprise you. I should have known it wouldn't be as simple as crashing with family. After 10 relentless years in corporate marketing, back-to-back campaigns, sleepless launches, and clients who thought urgency was a virtue, I burned out. Fully. The kind of burnout you don't bounce back from with a weekend away or a therapist's pep talk. So I left Chicago. I packed my notebooks, my 2 favorite mugs, and what was left of my optimism and drove south to Austin. My brother Dean lived there, and when I called, he didn't hesitate. "Stay as long as you need," he said. "You'll have your own room, Wi-Fi's fast, and Bridget's been talking about making chili again." Bridget, his wife. We weren't close, but I assumed proximity might change that. I imagined movie nights and lazy mornings, helping with groceries and maybe reconnecting over shared space. I was wrong. The first 2 days were quiet. I unpacked slowly, savoring the silence. The room was small but sunny, with sage-green curtains that fluttered like breath. Their house smelled like cinnamon and cedarwood, Bridget's candles, I guessed. It felt healing. I didn't touch work. I journaled. I took walks. I breathed. But on the 3rd day, after a long, hot shower, everything shifted. I stepped out into the hallway wrapped in a towel, still foggy from steam, when Bridget appeared, sharp eyes, arms crossed. "Hey," she said, her voice clipped. "Just a heads up, we try not to take long showers during peak hours. Our water bill's already insane." I blinked, startled. "Oh, sorry, I didn't realize. I'll be quicker next time." She didn't smile. "It's not a huge deal, just, be mindful." She walked off before I could respond. I stood there dripping, towel clutched, feeling oddly chastised in a house that had, hours ago, felt welcoming. I tried to shrug it off. Everyone has quirks, I told myself. Boundaries, water usage, sure, maybe she was just stressed. But that wasn't the end of it. That night, Dean was grilling chicken on the patio when Bridget poked her head out and said, "Hey babe, I think we're out of paper towels. Autumn used like half the roll today cleaning the counter." I froze. Dean laughed awkwardly. "We'll grab more tomorrow." Bridget didn't laugh. The air changed. Later in the hallway, as I reached for my door, I heard them in the kitchen. Bridget's voice, hushed but pointed. "She's using up everything like we're a hotel." Dean murmured something I couldn't catch. I slipped into my room, heart thudding. My suitcase sat in the corner, still half-zipped. Suddenly it didn't feel like I'd arrived, it felt like I'd intruded. That night I lay awake, listening to the soft tick of the ceiling fan, wondering, had I already overstayed my welcome? The next morning, the air between Bridget and me was paper-thin. I made coffee early, hoping to avoid her altogether. But when I turned from the sink, she was already there, leaning against the fridge, scrolling her phone. No good morning. Just the clink of her wedding ring against the granite counter. Dean, ever the peacekeeper, walked in not long after. He stretched, kissed Bridget on the cheek, then turned to me with a sleepy smile. "Hey sis, how's the freelance detox going?" "Pretty good," I said, forcing a smile. "Haven't opened my laptop once." "Nice," he said. "Let's all go out tonight. There's a new diner I've been wanting to try." Bridget looked up. "Sure." But something about the way she said it, flat, clipped, like someone agreeing to a dentist appointment. I hoped maybe I was imagining it. That evening, the diner was cozy and loud. Checkered floors, laminated menus, waitresses who called you hun. We slid into a booth near the window, and for a moment I believed things could still feel normal. Like maybe we'd laugh over milkshakes, tell stories, share appetizers. Instead, Bridget was glued to her phone. I tried, I really did. I asked about her teaching job. She shrugged and said it was fine. I complimented her earrings. "Oh, thanks," she muttered without looking up. Dean kept trying to stir the pot of conversation, but it kept boiling dry. "So, Autumn," he said cheerfully, "tell Bridget about your ad campaign, the one that got picked up nationally." I smiled, grateful. It was for a skincare company, actually. We built the campaign around the idea that women don't need to be fixed, just seen. It really resonated. "Cool," Bridget said, still not looking at me. "Another ad for soap." I paused. Dean didn't seem to catch the dig, but it stung. I reached for my water, forcing a laugh. "Well, yeah, but meaningful soap." That earned a tiny smirk. Not warm, not kind, just amused. By the time our food arrived, my appetite had vanished. I picked at my sandwich, pretending I didn't feel like the third wheel in a two-person marriage. Dean chatted aimlessly, unaware of the invisible trench forming across the table. At one point, I excused myself to the restroom just to breathe. I stood there under the buzzing fluorescent lights, staring at myself in the mirror. What was I doing here? I'd come to Austin to find peace, to reset. But instead, I was walking on eggshells in a house that once smelled like cinnamon and now smelled like judgment. Every movement, every bite, every shower felt like a crime. Was this still adjustment pains, or was I becoming an unwelcome presence? When I returned, Bridget was laughing softly at something on her phone. Dean leaned in to peek, smiling along. I slid back into the booth, invisible. The rest of the meal passed in slow, syrupy discomfort. Later, in the car, Dean tried to lighten the mood. "So, I think it's gonna rain this weekend. You still up for checking out that farmer's market, Autumn?" Before I could answer, Bridget said, "I have grading to do." Dean hesitated. "Right, okay, maybe next weekend." I stared out the window the rest of the way home, watching storefronts blur into taillights. The silence pressed against my temples like a headache. Back at the house, Bridget went straight to the bedroom without a word. Dean lingered awkwardly in the kitchen with me. "She's just tired," he said. I nodded. "Of course." He clapped my shoulder. "She'll warm up. You know how she gets with new dynamics." I wanted to believe him, but as I washed my glass and dried it quietly, careful not to use too many paper towels, I caught my reflection in the dark kitchen window. I didn't look like a guest. I looked like a trespasser who hadn't taken the hint. I stopped playing music in the mornings. Stopped using the main bathroom, too. It was easier to tiptoe into the guest one with the creaky door and rust-ringed tub than to see Bridget's expression if I caught her brushing her teeth. Dean had started going into the office again. Long hours, back-to-back meetings. He'd leave with a kiss on Bridget's cheek and a cheerful "see you two later," like everything was normal. Like we were all coexisting. But Bridget and I weren't coexisting. We were co-avoiding. She'd walk into the room and I'd instinctively shrink, sidestep, turn down my volume, even apologize if a drawer closed too loudly. I became hyper-aware of everything. The way my spoon clinked against my bowl, the sound of my sandals on hardwood. I kept counting how many times I flushed the toilet, how long I let the faucet run, whether I was breathing too loudly in the hallway. It was exhausting. I started cleaning the kitchen without being asked, washing the mugs Bridget left in the sink, folding Dean's hoodie that he always threw on the chair, trying desperately to be helpful to prove that I wasn't a burden. One morning, I found myself scrubbing out the inside of the microwave at 6:45 a.m. while Bridget ate yogurt behind me in complete silence. When I turned, she was staring at her phone, spoon mid-air, her face blank. I muttered, "I'll be out of your hair soon." She didn't respond. I lingered for a moment longer, waiting for what? A smile, a thank you, a single syllable, nothing. Back in my room, I curled up on the bed and stared at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above me. I came here to heal, to rest, to remember who I was when I wasn't drowning in deadlines and late-night client edits. But instead, I was shrinking, disappearing. I didn't feel like myself anymore. That night, I stayed in while they went to a movie. I didn't ask what they were seeing. I just said, "Enjoy," and closed the door before she could answer. I lay in the quiet house, watching shadows shift across the walls, and wondered how something so small could hurt so much. Not being shouted at. Not being insulted, just ignored. With precision, it was worse than cruelty, it was dismissal. When Dean got home, he knocked softly on my door. "Hey, movie was great, you okay?" I opened the door a crack. "Yeah, just tired." "You sure?" I nodded. "Thanks again for letting me stay, Dean." He smiled, that same boyish grin he'd had since high school. "Don't mention it, Bridget's just adjusting. She's particular, you know." I forced a laugh. "Yeah, I know." But that night I didn't sleep. Because it wasn't just Bridget being particular. It was me being in the way. Even when I was silent, invisible, helpful, I was still too much. And I didn't know how to be less without erasing myself entirely. If Bridget was a closed window, my father was a swinging door of sunlight. He arrived on a Friday, his old Chevy rumbling into the driveway like a memory that refused to age. I watched from the guest room window as he stepped out, flannel shirt unbuttoned over a white tee, a paper bag in one hand and a six-pack in the other. I didn't realize how much I'd missed his laugh until I heard it echo through the hallway. "Look at you two." he said, pulling Dean into a hug so tight I could hear the wind leave my brother's lungs. "Austin suits you." When I walked into the kitchen, he turned with that same sparkle he always had for me. "There she is, my girl with the $1,000,000 brain." I grinned. "Dad." He pulled me into a hug that lasted just a second too long, the kind that tells you without words that someone is proud of you, really proud. It unraveled something tight in my chest. He brought cinnamon rolls from a bakery near his motel, plopped them onto the table like a peace offering, and declared we were all going to brunch tomorrow. "You can't be in Texas without biscuits the size of your face," he said. Bridget smiled faintly. She was trying or pretending. I couldn't tell. But I let myself believe it was the former. For one breath of a weekend, the house felt warm again. At brunch, my father talked about old fishing trips, Dean's childhood obsession with dinosaur bones, and the time I tried to sell drawings door to door when I was 8. He beamed when I mentioned my burnout and how I was stepping away to reset. "Smart," he said, nodding. "Your head's worth more than any paycheck." Even Bridget seemed more relaxed. She asked a few polite questions, complimented my boots, passed me the jam without looking like it hurt her soul. It felt almost easy, and that more than anything made it feel fragile. After brunch, we walked along the lake. I kept my steps slow so I could talk with Dad. Leaves rustled above us like old songs, and he asked about the campaign I'd left behind. "I always knew you'd go big," he said. "But don't burn out your light, Autumn. People confuse being lit up with being on fire." That line stayed with me. Back at the house, Bridget even offered me tea, ginger, her favorite. I accepted it like a diplomat in enemy territory, smiling, cautious. But something in her posture was different, less rigid. She sat on the couch with Dean and my dad while I lingered in the kitchen, watching them laugh over an old home video my father had pulled up on his phone. I caught Bridget watching me once, not glaring, just observing, her expression unreadable. For a moment, I let myself believe maybe we were turning a corner, that maybe the warmth in the house wasn't just from the sun outside. Maybe things were shifting, maybe, but deep down, something in me didn't trust it, because silence like Bridget's didn't vanish overnight. It paused, it coiled, it waited. It happened the evening after Dad left. The shift, the snap back. One moment we were 3 plates around a takeout box of pad thai, joking about Dean's inability to handle spice, and the next, it was cold again, colder than before. Bridget didn't slam doors. She didn't shout. She didn't even raise her voice. She waited until Dean was out walking the dog and the house had sunk into that mid-evening hush. I was in the kitchen, rinsing our dishes, humming something from earlier in the car. The sound of water running should have masked her footsteps, but I felt her before I heard her. She leaned against the doorway, arms folded like parentheses. "You wash dishes like you're auditioning for sainthood," she said casually. I looked over my shoulder. "I figured I'd help. You cooked." I opened a plastic box. I turned off the faucet, drying my hands slowly. Still, there was a long pause, too long. Then she said it soft, crisp, final. "Guests eventually overstay." The words landed like glass on tile. They didn't shatter. They embedded. I stared at her, blinking. I started, then stopped. What was I supposed to say to that? It wasn't a question. It wasn't an invitation to discuss. It was a statement. A verdict handed down without trial. She smiled, but there was no kindness in it. Just a polite cruelty that came gift wrapped in calm. I nodded once, slowly. My lips parted like they wanted to argue, to defend, to ask why, but my throat closed around all of it. So I smiled back, weakly, like someone who just realized the room she was in wasn't a home, it was a waiting room, and the receptionist had just called time. She walked out before I could decide whether I'd imagined it worse than it was. I stood there, palms damp again, the towel clenched in one hand. The clock ticked louder than it should have, or maybe it was the echo of my own heartbeat. I walked to the living room, sat on the edge of the couch, tried to breathe, to rationalize. Maybe she didn't mean it like that. Maybe it was a joke, a misstep, a momentary lapse, but deep down I knew. No one makes that kind of comment by accident, not unless they've rehearsed it. It was deliberate, and it was meant to be quiet, like a chess move, unspoken, irreversible. When Dean came back, laughing, cheeks flushed from the walk, he flopped down beside me on the couch and started talking about something funny the dog had done. I laughed at the right parts, nodded at the rest, but my mind stayed frozen in that kitchen, staring at that smile. The house, once so small and cozy, now felt cavernous and echoing. Every corner hummed with a new tension. Even the light from the lamp beside me seemed to flicker slightly, as if it too was unsure it should be here. That night I brushed my teeth quietly, lights off in the hallway. I moved like an intruder. I didn't even flush. Not right away. As I curled up in bed, a thought kept circling. When someone tells you you've overstayed, even with a smile, you hear it in everything. The closing of cupboards, the silence at dinner, the absence of good morning. It was all there now, permanent, and there was no way to unhear it. I couldn't sleep that night. Not because of the heat, though Austin's spring nights clung like wet fabric to your skin, but because of the silence, the new kind, the accusing kind. I lay in bed with the fan spinning above me like it was chasing ghosts. My window cracked open to let in some air, but even the crickets seemed subdued, as if the whole block was holding its breath. What did I do wrong? That question repeated, over and over, as if my mind had jammed on it. Bridget's words from the kitchen played like a loop in the background. Guests eventually overstay. But the louder thought was my own voice, whispering that maybe I really had. Maybe I'd taken up too much room. Maybe I'd misread every glance, every silence. Maybe my very presence was exhausting. I turned on my side, then my back, then my other side. Nothing helped. At some point, I heard their bedroom door creak open, soft footsteps, then whispers. I sat up, holding my breath. Dean's voice, low and indistinct. Bridget's sharper, but still too muffled to decipher. I strained to hear, leaning toward the hallway, heart beating so loudly it blurred the edges of their voices. A phrase cut through. "She doesn't even notice," I held still. Then another, "Not her house." Dean murmured something back, and Bridget answered with a long, sighing sound. Like disappointment personified. I didn't catch the rest, but I didn't need to. The tone said enough. The cadence. The fact that they were talking about me after midnight like a shared inconvenience. I curled back into bed and pulled the blanket over my face, not for warmth, but to make the world smaller. I wanted to vanish, to fold in on myself like laundry no one wanted to deal with. I tried to justify it. Maybe they weren't talking about me. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe, just maybe, Bridget was venting about work and I'd inserted myself into it like a self-centered fool. But then I remembered the look in her eyes. Not just tired, not just annoyed. Done. Dean wouldn't say it, he couldn't. But I wondered if Bridget had finally worn him down. Whispered enough doubts, counted enough paper towels, pointed out enough water bills, until even my brother, my gentle, conflict-avoiding brother, had started to believe I was too much. I pressed my palms against my eyes, trying to block the thoughts. But they just got louder. Maybe the fault wasn't in Bridget. Maybe it was in me. Maybe I didn't know how to live quietly enough. Maybe my very being came with noise and clutter and expectations no one asked for. I started replaying every interaction since I'd arrived. That shower on day 3. The extra slice of banana bread I'd eaten. The time I used Bridget's mug without realizing it had sentimental value. The late-night call with a client I thought was quiet enough but maybe wasn't. Tiny things. But maybe, in a small house, they'd added up. Maybe my thank yous weren't warm enough. My presence not grateful enough. By 3:00 a.m., I was so tangled in self-doubt that I couldn't tell where Bridget ended and I began. I sat up in bed, turned on the dim desk lamp, and opened my notebook. I didn't write anything profound, just a list. Things I've done wrong, stayed too long, took long showers, cleaned like I was apologizing, tried too hard, didn't try enough, wasn't invisible, wasn't loud enough to be heard. I stopped at number 7. Not because I ran out of things to list, but because I realized I wasn't writing for clarity. I was writing to blame myself, and I didn't even know if I'd earned that. But here's the part no one warns you about. When someone decides you're a problem, everything you do becomes evidence. Even your silence, even your effort, especially your hope. I left the notebook open on my nightstand and lay back down. I didn't sleep. I just waited for morning like a person waiting for permission to leave. Morning came gray and slow, as if even the sun didn't want to witness what had to happen next. I woke feeling brittle, like one wrong glance would send me into 1,000 sharp little pieces. The house was quiet. Dean had left early. I heard the front door close sometime around 6, followed by the familiar hum of his car backing out of the driveway. I waited another hour before stepping into the hallway. The air smelled like toast and detergent, a strangely domestic scent that felt foreign now. Bridget was at the kitchen island, coffee in hand, scrolling her phone with a disinterested thumb. She didn't look up. I moved to pour water into the kettle, then hesitated. The thought came and went like a bird. She doesn't want you here. No amount of hot tea or careful steps could fix what had already curdled. I reached for a glass of water instead. Bridget finally looked up, eyes flat, mouth neutral. "You're up early." "I didn't sleep." She went back to scrolling. I stood there for a beat longer, staring at the edge of the counter like it might offer clarity. Then I said it, not rehearsed, not dramatic, just honest. "Do you want me to leave?" Bridget didn't flinch, didn't even pretend to be surprised. She set her mug down with practiced calm and folded her arms. "I think," she said slowly, "this arrangement was never meant to be long-term. I never said it would be. No. But it's been a while. 6 weeks." She shrugged. "Still," I nodded as if we were talking about the weather. And then she delivered the final blow, not with anger but with soft precision. "You don't belong here. This isn't your home." The air left my body so fast it felt like a punch. I stared at her, not because I didn't believe it, but because part of me had still hoped she wouldn't say it aloud, that she'd at least keep the cruelty veiled. But she didn't. She looked me right in the eyes and said what she'd been whispering in silence for weeks. I didn't cry, I didn't argue, I just nodded. Something inside me clicked into place. A small, solid door that closed quietly and forever. "Okay," I said. Then I turned and walked to the guest room. I pulled my backpack from the closet, tossed in a change of clothes, my notebook, my charger, the essentials. I didn't touch my suitcase, didn't bother with the rest. I paused only once, at the dresser, to take the photo of me, Dean, and our father at the lake last year. The one where we're all sunburned and grinning like fools. Everything else could stay. I walked back into the kitchen, backpack slung over one shoulder. Bridget was rinsing her mug, like nothing had happened, like I was just heading to a yoga class. I didn't speak. She didn't look up. I opened the front door, stepped into the sunlight, and closed it gently behind me. That was the thing about quiet exits. They say everything loud ones can't. Outside, the world was bright and full of noise. A lawn mower roared a few houses down. A dog barked at a squirrel. Somewhere, a kid yelled about cereal. Life moved on. So I didn't know where I was going yet, but I knew what I was walking away from. Not just a house, but a place where my presence had become a problem. And I knew this much. I'd rather be nowhere than be somewhere I wasn't wanted. It didn't take long for Dean to notice. I had barely checked into the motel, one of those sad little places off the freeway with floral curtains and a vending machine that only took quarters, when my phone started buzzing. The screen lit up with his name. I stared at it for a moment, thumb hovering over decline. Then I answered. "Autumn." His voice was tight, confused. "Where are you?" I leaned against the motel wall, watching dust spin in the strip of sunlight cutting across the floor. "Somewhere quiet." There was a pause. "Bridget said you left." "I did. She said you just walked out." "Yep." Another beat of silence, longer this time. I could picture him standing in the living room with his phone pressed to his ear, looking around like maybe I'd pop out from behind the couch. "Why?" he asked. It wasn't angry, just bewildered. Gentle, like everything Dean always was. I exhaled slowly. "Dean, you found my pillow on the curb this morning." Silence. "I didn't put it there," I added. "So either you did or Bridget thought the guest room needed decluttering." He didn't answer. I didn't expect him to. "That pillow," I said, voice cracking just slightly, "was from the Airbnb I stayed at in Portland last year. I bought it because it reminded me of feeling safe." I heard him inhale. "I get it," I said, soft now. "She's your wife, your house, your life. I'm just your sister who came for too long and stayed too quietly." "Autumn." "No, Dean, don't. You let it happen. You watched me shrink and still called it peace." "I didn't know." "She told me I didn't belong," I said. "She said this wasn't my home." A long silence followed, heavy as stone. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "I didn't know she said that." I almost believed him, almost. "Anyway," I said, shifting the backpack on my shoulder. "I'll send someone for the rest of my things, no rush." "Where are you staying?" "A motel." "What motel?" "It doesn't matter." "Autumn, please." "I'm fine, Dean." More silence. I could hear the disappointment in his breath, the guilt that hadn't matured yet into apology. "I miss Dad already," I said, trying to smile. "He brought cinnamon rolls and light." Dean didn't say anything, not at first, then, "She's pregnant." It hit like a dart to the ribs. I blinked. "What?" "Bridget, she found out last week. We were going to tell you." My stomach turned. So this was why the shift, the sudden urgency. the impatience masked as household boundaries. She hadn't seen me as a sister in need. She'd seen me as a risk. I didn't respond. Maybe that's why she's been. No, I cut in. Don't use that. Don't let motherhood be the excuse for cruelty. He swallowed audibly. I just wish you'd told me how you felt. I did, I said quietly, just not in words you were listening for. A truck rumbled past the motel. A dog barked in the distance. I felt the hollow ache of being in a place with no history. Goodbye, Dean, I said. And I hung up. I didn't cry. I didn't throw the phone or pace the room or scream into a pillow. I sat on the edge of the creaky bed, stared at the stain on the carpet, and listened to the motel fridge hum. And for the first time in weeks, I felt still. Not okay, but still. I didn't announce it. I didn't draft a dramatic letter or send a bold group text. I simply called my realtor. She was brisk, professional, and strangely comforting. I told her the address, the history, and the quiet truth. I wanted to sell. I didn't explain that my brother lived there, or that the woman who now controlled the thermostat and the tone of every conversation was the one who'd smiled while asking me to disappear. She didn't ask. We just moved forward. The house was in my name, a gift from our father, signed over before he moved back to Nashville. It had been his pride, craftsman style with exposed beams and a porch swing that still creaked the way it had when we were kids. Dean never cared about paperwork. I handled the legal end while he handled the grill and backyard maintenance. It was always meant to be shared until it wasn't. My realtor sent the first formal notice to vacate 2 days later. A basic letter. No flourish, no threat. Just a line drawn with ink instead of conversation. That's when the family group chat exploded. It started with Bridget. Bridget, just received a letter from some agent named Marla. Autumn, what's going on? Then Dean, wait, is this real? Are you selling the house? Bridget, we need to talk. This is not okay. Bridget, please call us. This isn't how family handles things. Bridget, you said you just needed space. This isn't space. This is sabotage. I didn't answer. I muted the thread and placed my phone on the motel nightstand like a fire I'd walked away from. I took a walk instead. No plan. No map. Just blocks and intersections and the soft thud of my sneakers against sidewalk. It was strange, walking alone with nothing urgent to fix. No job to manage. No room to tiptoe through. No apology waiting to be preloaded. Just wind and the soft orange of streetlights blinking on. That night, I ate Thai food out of a paper box and stared at the motel TV as if it could distract me from everything I wasn't feeling yet. The next morning, more messages. Dean, Autumn, this doesn't make sense. You can't just evict us without a conversation. Bridget, this is cruel. I'm pregnant. Dean's your brother. Dean, you said we were family. Bridget, we need stability right now. You of all people should understand that. I read each line like a scientist examining fossilized guilt. And then I muted them again. There was no satisfaction in their panic, no thrill in watching them squirm. That wasn't the point. The point was this. I'd spent weeks trying to minimize myself into a shape that fit inside someone else's comfort. Now I was reclaiming space that had always been mine. I walked past a bookstore downtown, stopped to read the title in the window, The Art of Quiet Power. I almost laughed. There was something poetic in the timing. Back at the motel, my phone buzzed one last time before I powered it down. A single message from Bridget. No accusations, no pleas, just, why are you doing this? I stared at it for a long moment. Then I whispered, more to myself than to her, because I was never meant to beg for a place in my own home. I didn't block them. I didn't send a manifesto or a list of grievances. No reply all, no final word. I just muted everything. The group chat, my brother's texts, Bridget's endless barrage of guilt-laced messages disguised as olive branches. It wasn't silence out of spite. It was peace by necessity. For the first time in months, I moved without flinching, walked without worrying who I might disturb, ate chips in bed without fearing judgment from a hallway glance. I wandered the city like someone who'd just been paroled from emotional labor. Bookstores, coffee shops, a park where dogs ran off leash with joyful abandon. I let myself feel the sun on my arms, let the breeze lift strands of hair I'd stopped styling weeks ago. At night, I walked, not to get anywhere, just to move, to exist in a body that no longer felt like it had to apologize for itself. I passed houses with porch lights on, curtains drawn. I imagined the people inside, arguing over dinner, laughing at sitcoms, ignoring each other, forgiving each other. Ordinary things, things I'd given up craving. One night I bought a candle, cinnamon and cedarwood, just like the ones Bridget burned when I first arrived. I lit it in the motel room and didn't cry, not because I didn't feel anything, but because the ache had changed shape. It no longer demanded tears. It just settled beside me like an old friend who understood. The realtor kept me updated. Dean hadn't responded formally to the vacate notice yet. Bridget had sent a message through her own lawyer, citing emotional distress and extenuating circumstances. But there was no legal hold. The house was mine, and I wasn't rushing. I didn't need revenge. I just needed closure that didn't require their permission. One afternoon, while sipping lukewarm coffee in a downtown cafe, I scrolled past a job listing that made my heart race. Not because it was perfect, but because I didn't immediately disqualify myself. A nonprofit in the city. Communications work. Focused on mental health access for women. I bookmarked it. Later that night, I opened a fresh notebook and wrote down 3 things. A home that doesn't whisper. A job that doesn't erase me. A life that isn't built on being useful to people who don't see me. They weren't resolutions. They were compass points. The next morning, I did something small but monumental. I took the house off mute, not the family thread, not the drama, just the physical space, the bones and boards I once called shelter. I emailed Marla. Let's take the next step. Then I opened my Photos app, found an old picture of the living room back when I'd first inherited the house. Before Dean and Bridget moved in, before the curtains changed and the warmth thinned. I posted it on my private feed with a caption that felt simple but heavy with meaning. Looking for the right place to raise my niece. That was it. No tag, no commentary, just the truth out loud. I didn't check for reactions, didn't wait for messages. Instead, I walked down to the lake, watched the sun melt across the water and breathed. Not like someone recovering from damage, but like someone who had survived herself and was finally ready to be whole. It was raining that night. The kind of soft, insistent rain that makes the world feel slower, like someone turned down the volume on the universe. I was curled up in a sweatshirt 2 sizes too big, the motel heater humming like a lullaby when I heard the knock. It startled me. Not because it was loud, but because it was impossible. No one knew I was here. I hesitated, then stood slowly and peeked through the curtain. It was Bridget, hair soaked, coat clinging to her like it had given up trying to keep her dry. She held something in her arms, a plastic bag, a file, I couldn't tell. She knocked again. Softer, I opened the door just a crack. Rain hit my bare toes. She looked up, eyes red, not puffed from tears, just tired, human in a way I hadn't seen since I arrived. "Can I come in?" she asked. I didn't answer, I just stepped back. She entered quietly, dripping. She didn't smell like candles tonight, just cold rain and humility. For a long time we didn't speak. Then she sat down on the edge of the chair by the small table, placed the bag on it. It was a pie, homemade, slightly crushed from the storm. "Pumpkin," she said. "It's what your dad said you liked best." I nodded. I didn't sit. She looked around. "This place is—" She didn't finish. He didn't need to. Her eyes said it all, and then, without any prompting, she began. "I hated you for a long time," she said. "Not because of anything you did, because of who you are." She looked up at me, her voice even but small. "You're smart, people respect you. Dean lights up when you walk into a room, your dad calls you the brave one. And me," she gave a soft laugh. "I've always been the adjuster, the one who makes sure everyone stays comfortable, and your kind of presence disrupts that." She wiped her nose on her sleeve. "I didn't want you to come stay with us, not because I didn't think you needed it, but because I knew. Once you were there, the whole house would lean toward you." I didn't speak. She wasn't done. "And then I found out I was pregnant," she whispered. "And everything felt tighter. I panicked. I started seeing you as competition, a threat. And I twisted that into little jabs, paper towels, showers, silence." She looked up. "I weaponized the quiet." That sentence cracked something. She stared at the wall, eyes glossing. "And then you walked out, and I felt victorious for 1 minute, just one, until I saw your pillow on the curb and realized what I'd done." She stood slowly, reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a folded piece of paper and set it on the table beside the pie. "It's the ultrasound," she said. "I thought you should see your niece." My throat tightened. She looked back at me. "I'm sorry," she said, real, unequivocal. "I was cruel and scared and jealous of a woman who had done nothing but try to stay small in a space I kept shrinking." Silence. Then she picked up her umbrella and stepped toward the door. She paused. If you never speak to me again, I understand, but I needed to tell you this to your face, not through Dean, not through guilt. I opened the door. The rain had eased to a mist. She stepped out, then turned once more. You were never a guest, she said. You were family, and I made you feel like furniture. Then she was gone. I closed the door. I didn't cry. I didn't rush to text her, or Dean, or anyone. Instead, I sat, unfolded the paper, stared at the grainy image, a tiny bean of life, my niece. I thought of the caption I'd posted days ago, the one I hadn't explained, a home for my niece. Maybe not a house, maybe not now, but something, a beginning. A few days later, I called Marla and paused the sale. I didn't cancel it, just paused. And I posted one more picture on my feed, me standing on a porch swing. Not the old one, a new one, captioned, "Quiet power isn't loud, it just lasts longer."